Great.
Okay, hello everyone. We're still all getting together. There are a couple people joining in still. I'll keep an eye on that. And in the meantime, I say let's get started. So I'm Avi. I'm the instructor for the LIL program. Some of you have definitely worked with me. I see some names I recognize. And if you haven't, you probably will eventually. So I'm happy to meet you all. Today, we're doing the second installment of our speaker series, how to get people to listen to you. We're very lucky to have Dr. Egger here. He is an affiliated fellow with the Yale Law School's Information Society Project and an associate professor with tenure at the University of Minnesota School of Journalism. His specialties are mass communication, journalism, government and politics, international economics and development, and telecommunications. We love him. He is super popular and very experienced with our students. And we are going to be very lucky to hear from him today. I will leave it to you, Doctor.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Avi. I'm pleased to be here and nice to meet all of you on the call. It would be wonderful if some of you wanted to turn on your camera. We can create a kind of a friendly environment. It helps us see each other as people. If you're decent, feel free to turn on your camera. Feel welcome. As Avi mentioned, I'm Colin Egger. I am a professor at the University of Minnesota. I've been here for 8 years, and I'm very pleased to talk to you about something that is really important in my line of work, which is getting people to pay attention to you and think about the things that you're saying. So just a little bit about me. You can see this slightly blurry image. This is my campus. That's the Upper Mississippi River in Minnesota. It's a lovely place to live and work. Big campus. Lots of things going on, which means there are lots of messages happening all at once. 50,000 people. So for me, it's a daily task to think about what am I trying to communicate and to whom. So these are some things about me. I'm a professor, so I'm having to talk to colleagues, talk to students, talk to people on committees, lots of things by email. So there's a lot of different ways I have to communicate in that role. I'm an author, I write things, so I have to think about being clear and being purposeful and thinking about my audience. I'm a speaker. I go to events sometimes and I have to think about what's of interest to people in this room. Why should they care? I consult and I work with companies, and I have to constantly think about what they want and how I can be a part of the success they see. And I'm a community member. I live on a street. I have neighbors. There are things I care about where I live. And so in that role as well. So in each of these things, I'm constantly having to think about how I communicate and how I try to set an agenda. And that's something I think that each of you should do. Think about the roles you have. You are a student, you are a friend, you're a family member, you are an aspiring professional, you are all these different things. Write them down and think about the kinds of communication that would matter for you. So I regularly teach group sessions for Ingenious and Scholar Launch, and these are 3 that I teach most summers. I think it's a really exciting time to think about these kinds of topics. When we think of media, we're thinking about our engagement with other people near and far. We're thinking about the kinds of things that are, of course, entertainment, they're for fun, but they're also core sources of where we get knowledge and learn about the world, inform opinions, and decide what kinds of professional opportunities to pursue. These are huge growing areas for jobs. At my university, our emerging media area where I work is one of the fastest growing for good reason. There's lots of growth in the private sector. There's lots of research. There's lots of really exciting stuff in this area. So I hope you share my excitement. So for today, here's what I'm hoping to do. I want to just begin by pausing and thinking about, why does it matter to set an agenda? Why should we be organized and purposeful? Uh, then talking a bit about choosing audiences, getting involved. Then just really pausing and thinking about, who are these people? What do they want? How can we think in terms of shared goals? Then communicating purposefully. What are you doing and why are you doing it? And then a key thing here that's often forgotten is that you want to find the right mix of in-person and online. These two things can serve each other really well if you use them effectively. And then just to wrap up, and then Avi's going to manage Q&A from all of you. So throughout this, you can start to write things down. What's something you want to learn more about? What's a question you have? If you have a point you want to make, that's the time to do it. So already you can start thinking about what you'd like to say then. So let's start by talking about why this matters. Well, it's a busy world. There's lots going on out there, and you're at the stage in your career, an early stage, but a really crucial stage in which you can learn to articulate what's important to you, and you can try to build alliances so that other people can help you get what you want. Building alliances is really key. You want to do the thing that's important to you in a way that inspires others to join you. If you can do these things, lots of good stuff awaits you. It means you can find a good place to study and work, a place that's a good fit, a place where you'll be happy and successful because you've really thought about it. Mentors are key. If you're able to articulate your needs and your values, you're going to find people who are happy to be your mentors, and you'll build a large network of people. And if you have a good, robust network, lots of opportunities await. You also gain the trust and respect of others. Because if you're that person who is clear in what they're trying to get, and they're purposeful and they're thinking about other people, you'll become that person. And if you're agenda setting and people know who you are and they think of you as a thought leader, it's more likely that you'll be in the right place at the right time when something good comes up. So I'm going to give you a few exercises. And what I'll ask you to do, and for each of these, there'll be about a minute and a half, we'll say 90 seconds for each of them. And then what I'll ask you to do is take a moment and either on your phone, on your screen, on a piece of paper, whatever works for you, I'll ask you to respond to this prompt. So every time you see a green slide, that's what you've got to do. And here's the first one. So the first exercise is setting your priorities. If you're not clear on what you want, nobody else will be. So if you're clear on what is important to you, take a moment right now and write down, maybe pick one of these things and decide it's most important to you and write a little bit about it. So it could be that you want to get new skills. You want to get a qualification, a degree, something like that, an experience, an internship. Great. You want to build your network. You want to find other people who work in an area that is of interest to you. Great. Maybe you want to raise your profile. You want to be a bit more visible. You want to be a thought leader, or you're already doing great work and you want to get recognition for that. That's also good. And the last thing, you're already in an institution of some kind, working or interning or studying, but you're looking to move up in some way. So take 90 seconds, pick one of these, and put some notes down about why this is important to you right now.
Please write your notes in the chat. And as you're getting decent, turn on your cameras. Eye contact is important to communication.
Start popping your thoughts in the chat whenever you feel inspired.
Make sure as you're putting your information in the chat box for this activity that you make sure it's on everyone and not just me because I'm the host, okay?
Well, I think what we can do is if you haven't had a chance to post them yet in the chat, hang on to them, and we'll have a chance to build on those in an iterative way, the next exercise. All right, next up, you need to choose your audiences. You have some priorities. You have a sense of what you want to accomplish. This is important. Now think about who these people are. So you can make a list, institutions, networks, people who can help. Think about what you're trying to seek specifically. So we've gone from these kind of big priorities into specific, tangible opportunities. Where do you want to go? Companies, institutions, organizations. Make a list. Be specific. Why those? And how do you do it? What's the process? Are there applications? Do you just show up to meetings? Do you need to meet somebody? Find out how you join and figure out who makes the decisions. So it's up to you to navigate all of this complex information and to decide what's the best way to approach this opportunity. All right, next one. Exercise in choosing audiences. So here's a quick pro tip. It can be really hard to find audiences online on your own. It's a lot easier if you go through existing kinds of structures like schools, companies, clubs, professional networks. And because then you often have a built-in audience. You often have communications people you can work with there. And when people see the message from that organization, they say, ah, I know that, I'm a part of that. So it's not just noise, it is part of something that they already trust. So save yourself a lot of time and find the right kinds of pre-existing institutions and networks to use. So when you look at your goals that we talked about earlier, and you can identify your target audiences. For the opportunities and priorities and goals you talked about earlier, think of one or more of these that might help you. So let's take a moment and you can add to what you've already written down. And if you feel inspired to put them in the chat, that's great. Okay, so I think we probably have a sense um, of our audiences at this point. So let's move on to the next part. You want to think about things from their perspective. It sounds kind of, what? I want to talk. I want people to listen to me. And that's important. But it's also important so that people understand that you understand them and that their values match yours. So here's some examples of things below that these could be their perspective. I need to find a qualified applicant who can do this and this and this. It's good to you to know that. And that way you can speak to that. I need someone who's highly motivated and cares about this important cause. That's good. You care about that cause too, and you're highly motivated. And that way you are in alignment with that because you share the values of that cause is important to you as an activist. Lots of people in business are always looking for talent and future leaders. And so if you're that person, you can communicate that. Similarly, people who care about institutional values and traditions. Lots of organizations have a long history and sense of themselves, and they love it when people come in understanding what they're about, and who really kind of breathe in the institutional nature. So when you think of things from their point of view, you're going to be a lot more effective when you speak to them. Here's the next one. Moving towards shared goals. Take a look at the priorities that you listed earlier. Think of some shared goals that you might have with others. So your goal, I want to join this program or company. That's great. You move to fitting into their institutional priorities. You find out what those are, and you try to communicate the ways you fit into those. You also might want a mentor. I need advice. That's great. You can also think, you give them a chance to reflect. Because for mentors, when their mentees ask really smart, thoughtful questions, the mentor comes away thinking, I'm thinking about this organization differently as a result. You can actually be a part of them learning more about their role and their work. So give people a chance to reflect and ask good questions. You want people to look at your work. You want to be visible. That is great. I want you to be visible. What you can do is you can find related work that has inspired you, and you can promote that. Academic Twitter is full of people saying, look at me and my work. The better posts are, in the course of this work I was doing, I read these 3 really great papers, and I want to share these great papers with you. Those people read that post and they say, this is incredible. What a nice person. I'm going to read this person's work. This is how you build community and you get people interested in your work. Create conversations. You want the job? Great. Show that you can develop a new aspect of the business. Find out what the business is and communicate the ways that you can do that. So take a look at the priorities you listed earlier and think about the audiences that you listed earlier. Now what you can do is take 90 seconds or so, and you can think about some shared goals that you might be able to create for those.
And dear students, if you're not quite sure what to write, make sure you're at least looking at the chat in my examples to kind of give you an idea of how it might apply to you, okay?
Okay, now that you have shared goals, let's be purposeful. People will listen to you if they sense that you share a set of values. If you care about their lives, their work, they'll appreciate that. Make it a two-way conversation, right? Show that you care about their values by reading. You want to read the things they've written, observe the things they are doing, ask questions, listen, find out where they're comfortable, meet them on their terms. Adaptability is a really, really vital thing, both in communication itself, but also in a broader professional sense. Be deliberate. Employers they love professionalism. So communicate purposefully. So let's do a quick thing. You got the rhythm for it already. So show it what's important, and to you is also important to them. To look at your audiences, think about their values. Maybe what they value is academic excellence. You're applying to a scholarship program. That's important. You want to make sure that all your communication embodies that excellence. Maybe you want to work in business. You want to show the ambition and innovation, and you are part of that. Maybe this is about activism and getting people to care about the cause that's important to you. You know, that dedication, right? And the last, in a broader sense, community building, which is more long-term, but wherever you go, whether it's in school or whether it's in college or whether it's in work, it's good to be a community builder, somebody who creates connections and who inspires other people to be a part of something. So think of one of the audiences you wrote about earlier and think what their values might be.
For those of you who've just popped in, we're putting our answers in the chat to these questions.
So you can continue to think about these values for each of your audiences. That's important because when you're reaching out online and in person, you want to make sure that you share these values. So online communication is kind of a default in a lot of ways, right? We have lots of Zoom meetings, we have lots of emails, we use chat apps all the time. That's great. Advantages, it is fast, it's mass communication, it's cheap or free, all good. But we get a lot of messages. And unless individuals have a connection in one-on-one or via some kind of institution, the message is often not good. It's easy to ignore it. On the other hand, in-person communication is highly effective. You get people into the same room, they are sharing space, they may be sharing food, they're sharing oxygen, they're sharing their travel experiences of how they got there. It's far easier to create a bond. This is why we still have conferences. This is why we have all kinds of in-person meetings. Um, uh, but it takes planning, it takes time, it can be expensive. So what do? Well, I think you do it both ways. You try to strengthen your in-person community with an online network. Keep in touch online with people you see in person. Use technology to strengthen that connection. And try also to deepen online connections with in-person meetups. Online connections can be very strong if they're in the context of really specific things like gaming or some kind of online activism, or a shared production of something. But often these connections are really, they can be tenuous, but somehow meeting in person can strengthen those. There's been a lot of disruption, as you know, since COVID. And so if you can be the person who brings people together, I think that's a good thing. People listen to people who bring people together. And last one of these. Just for a moment, think about the ways that you can engage meaningful with people. Think of events you can go to. Think of ways to be an effective participant. Follow up afterwards online. You see the hybridity here, right? Use the in-person to drive the online back and forth. Look for ways to strengthen ties. You can build shared goals. And again, be that person who inspires engagement and involvement. So for what you were just talking about earlier with shared values, just take a moment and think about the ways you can have an in-person and online element to your communication, if possible. So with a sense of that, I just want to put together a quick summary, and then we can have a bit of a discussion, answer some questions. Step one, set your priorities. Begins with you. Decide what's important to you. Make a conscious list of these things. Then choose audiences. Get them involved. Then make sure you're understanding other people and you're developing shared goals with them. Communicate purposefully. How are you communicating and why? And the last thing we did, finding the right mixture of in-person and online. Do these things well, people are going to listen to you. You'll be able to set an agenda. In a busy, messy world, you'll be able to get your messages out there to audiences big and small, near and far. So I hope these give you some things to think about, and I hope they're useful for you. Thanks to the comments in the chat, both from Avi and from Brian, and I'm excited to hear more questions, discussions, thoughts that you might have. So Avi, I hand it over to you to facilitate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I found that super helpful. And thank you for Brian and Jenny leaving so many good examples. My first question is, because we have a lot of young students, sometimes as young as, 6th grade, what can we do to combat the perception that they don't know what they're talking about just because they're young?
Well, one thing they can do is really get to know the subject and surprise people with their knowledge and with the quality of questions they ask. So show that they should be taken seriously. And I think they do that, they'll not only win the respect of people, they'll also make people think, maybe I've underestimated young people. so they can be a representative of young people in that way.
Excellent. Does anybody have an example of a time that somebody, perfect, Brian?
Oh, I just have a question for
Yeah,
my
go ahead.
yeah. So Dr. Auger, as a freshman right now in high school, so I'm starting off young. So do you have any advice for young people that is struggling with persuading others and interacting with others?
Sure, a lot of it will depend on the context. Are you thinking like, tell me more about what you
Yeah.
want to persuade people to do?
Yeah, so internships maybe. I know it's
Great.
still kind of young for me as a freshman, but next year, like for sophomore, like if I want to do some internships, how can I interact with, let's say, a company? Then how do I persuade them? How do I like show that I am interested in getting this internship, and then how do I express that?
First, get to know the company and what it does, and identify one or two areas that are really of interest to you, and get to know those areas in particular. And then you can put together um, resume and a list of skills. Um, and you can ask for what are called informational interviews, that you can reach out to somebody at a company and make sure you have a really good explanation to say, hi, I'm really interested in your company. I'm looking at internship options right now, and this area really interests me. And I wonder if you might have 30 minutes just to answer a few questions about your work. And you'll ask them about their work, what kind of experience they've had at the company, and so on. And in doing that, you'll get to know the company even better. And they may be able to say, actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, we do have this opportunity over here. Let me put you in touch. That happens pretty often. So you can reach out, but do your work first. We get to know the company and have your documents ready so that you can do, here, you want a resume? No problem. Here you go. Um, People really appreciate that kind of thing. Good
Okay,
question.
thank you.
Yes, awesome question, Brian. Thank you so much. Um, just to check in, does anybody have advice sort of on these questions that we've just talked about? Any recommendations, any stories they want to share? Parents, you're welcome to do so too. All right, raise your hand like Brian gave you an example for. Brilliant, Jenny.
I just have a question.
Yeah, please.
So, would you think that if, for example, if we were applying for an internship or anything with an interview, at the end, when they ask you if you have a question, would they appreciate it more if you did ask them a question?
I think you should definitely ask a good question. A question that's not, already answered. That's not a standard question. Um, like, don't ask them things that you could look up on their website. The kind of question you might ask would be, well, maybe something that's not clear in the interview about timelines. Maybe you can say, what's the next step and what should I expect? Kind of administrative things like that. But you might also ask questions that are a bit more kind of informational. You might ask them about uh, areas you want to work in. Maybe you ask them about the kind of work. Maybe if it's uh, if there's anyone else that you should talk to. Um, it's good to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Brian.
To follow up with that question. So how do you stand out against other people that is wanting that internship? Let's say there's 20 people, and then I want that internship, and there's 20 people, other people that wants that internship. How do I stand out?
Some of it's beforehand and putting together really good documents. Some of it's how young is too young to create a LinkedIn profile. Having something of an online presence. And some of it's having good grades and good references and being ready with that application. Some of it's also how well you reach out, and reaching out in a professional, kind of low key way, not too aggressive. Just saying, I sort of like I said a moment ago, you reach out and you have a reason to reach to that person, and you have a really smart conversation. They will remember that. It's that individual communication. That's one way to cut through a huge stack of applications. Yeah. I'm
Thank
pro
you.
internship. I think they're really great opportunities. And I think that's something where you build skills, you build a network, you gain exposure to different kinds of work, and that's really valuable, both in your studies and your future career. So pro internships over here.
If I could add on to that, always say thank you. It's something, people aren't trying to be rude, but it's something, people forget, especially when it's online communications. Whether, if someone has read your application, if it's possible to reply to that email address, or even if you, look up someone's email address and thank them for reading your application, thank them for interviewing you. Us old people are old fashioned. We like a hello and thank you and you're welcome. Anyone else got a question before I continue asking mine? Okay, jump in at any time. I am curious, does your advice change when we're talking about communicating in like a hostile environment? So for instance, those of us who are going to do things like nonprofits or like political action groups.
Well, yeah, you're going to have different kinds of audiences if you work in these spaces. I don't have to deal with that quite as much in my work. But you raise a really good point. How do you deal with, how do you communicate with audiences who might not be receptive to what you're trying to do? And I think part of it is you can be informed, really try to understand these other groups and why they may stand in opposition to you. You may find that there could be some misunderstandings, and maybe you can be a part of resolving some of those. But you can also choose the right terms in which you can communicate. That communicating in a hostile way can be really exhausting, and it's often not very purposeful and very effective. So you can think of ways of communicating that lower the temperature, and it can make for a better quality discourse. I mean, this is the theory. It's easier to say that than it is to do that. But it's I hope we can do that.
Me too. Do you have any tips for creating a welcoming space? So you mentioned, us sharing food and oxygen and things like that when we're in person. Are there any sorts of like feng shui or anything that you do to create that really welcoming space?
Nice to have if it's an office or anything like that, make sure the space is not bare, that there are things in the room. There are books, there are plants. Food and beverages is a really great kind of icebreaker for people. It creates a sense of togetherness and equality. And I think that's really important in creating a strong bond in a meeting. It's why I think that in-person meetings can be so effective. Keep in mind also that people who are over 40 really prefer in-person communication a lot of the time. And so just remember that if these are going to be your bosses, the people who are, just understand this is how they like to communicate. So be good at that. But it's harder in a digital space to create that sort of thing. You can do that via the chat. You can do that by just really taking the time to understand the people you're meeting with. A little harder.
Thank you. I've got one more. Everyone else, while we're going through this one, rack your brain for any more questions, while we have an expert here. my question is, do you think that there is something that we can do in our everyday lives that is going to improve our communication like organically? So like for instance, I always tell my students to take a service job, like waitress, do something like that. You learn all the tricks of sort of like reading the room, reading a person before you interact with them. Are there any other sorts of, just things that people do in their normal lives that would really help give those of us who are more shy some practice?
Um, well, being shy is not a bad thing. What it means is that you're choosing when and how to communicate. So often the shy people can be really deliberate in ways. So if you're shy, that's okay. You own that. You can use that to your advantage. Um, but I think part of it is just exposing yourself to new contexts. Um, showing up for meetings, um, feeling comfortable with people, and I think they're going to find that if you're putting in the effort and that you really care about this and you're learning, then they should listen to you. Even if you're not yelling at them, making a lot of noise, they should listen to you. At some point, they'll realize that.
I think that's very true. Yes, Brian.
What are some challenges that you faced being an author, a speaker, starting off? Because I know it's very hard when you're just starting off and not knowing what to do in your career.
Yeah, well, with the book that I published, at the time I started, I was a PhD student, and you know, PhD students aren't world famous. They don't have huge audiences. So we had to convince the publisher, there were three of us who wrote the book. We had to convince them that each of us was worth listening to. And so we had to show that we had the expertise, and we had to identify the kinds of people who might want to read the book and why they would be, what they would want to, and why the publisher should care about this book idea. It was a book about digital education, and this was 10 years ago. And it's surprising now that we have to explain that digital education is important. But at the time, we had to do that. So that was the challenge, convincing a major university press to think about something that we thought was really important. And I think we were correct about that. But it's about doing the research, identifying audiences, showing why they should care, and making a shared set of goals. And so we did it.
Thank you. All right. Any more questions? Okay, if you have any, everybody knows where to find me or where to find somebody who can find me. I'm gonna pop my email in the chat for anyone who has any questions after this. And thank you so much, Dr. Egger, for giving us this great insight. Any parting words of things you want us to remember?
No, just to I hope you enjoy this weekend. It's a beautiful Saturday morning here, in this part of the world. Um, and just really think about what you want to say and why people should listen to you.
Excellent. It's spring break, so try it on some people. You've got more free time. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Auger.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.